They laughed at you once, when you were quiet, when you over-explained, when you waited for them to see your worth. You thought being loyal would protect you. You thought patience would be rewarded. You thought being a good person would mean something. It didn't, because power doesn't care how nice you are, and people don't respect what they don't fear losing. You were taught that being strategic made you a bad person, so you became predictable. You let emotion drive your decisions. You trusted appearances. You forgave apologies that weren't earned. You defended people who would watch you drown, and somewhere along the way they realized something you hadn't. You were addicted to being understood. They weren't, and that was the turning point, not for them, for you. That's the moment you became prey, not because they were smarter, not because they were crueler, but because they were colder, and in this world, cold wins. You never learned how to detach. You never learned how to watch in silence. You never learned how to get what you want without needing to explain why. They did, and so they took from you time, peace, control. Not because they needed it, but because they could. You tell yourself you're just sensitive. You say you're still healing. You say you don't want to become one of them. But here's the truth no one ever told you. You already are one of them. You just haven't accepted it yet. Because buried under all that overthinking is a version of you that doesn't flinch, that doesn't apologize for being sharp, that doesn't explain silence, that doesn't seek fairness, only leverage. You don't need to become cruel. You need to become unreachable. That's what they fear. Not your anger, not your tears, not your healing, your indifference. So no, this isn't about how to be happier. It's about how to become untouchable, and it starts by destroying everything you were taught to believe. Because weakness isn't a personality trait, it's a habit, and unless you learn these 10 Machiavellian habits, the world will keep breaking you and calling it love. You want power? It begins with subtraction. Les émotions, les accès, les réactions. More silence, more detachment, more control. They won't recognize you after this. Good. Let them miss the version of you that couldn't see through them. And if you've already felt this shift coming, subscribe, comment. Stay ahead of the ones still pretending they don't see it. They don't want your love. They want your reaction. That's the transaction they never said out loud. They provoke you to confirm they still control the temperature of your emotions. And every time you flinch, explain, plead, or defend, they win. Because control isn't loud, it's subtle, and the one who can stay silent the longest rules the room. You were conditioned to think silence means weakness, but Machiavellians know the truth. Silence is a weapon because it creates uncertainty, and uncertainty breeds fear. They don't fear your words. They fear your indifference, your unreadability, your lack of response. You think you're being kind when you explain your emotions, but what you're really doing is giving them a map to the parts of you they can twist, and they will twist them, not always out of malice, sometimes just to test if you're still theirs to break. That's what you never understood. People don't need a reason to destroy you. They just need to believe you'll let them, and every time you react, they learn exactly how to control you. So the first habit is brutal, but surgical. Starve them, not out of vengeance, out of precision. When they insult you, you look through them. When they bait you, you don't blink. When they disappear, you let them stay gone, because once you stop responding, they stop performing. They call you cold? That's projection. What they really mean is, I can't manipulate you anymore. You will lose people when you master this. Let them go. A person who punishes you for protecting your peace was never on your side. You will be misjudged. Good. Let them misunderstand you. It's the first line of defense. Because in a world addicted to reaction, your calm becomes a threat. And soon, they'll stop testing you not because they changed, but because you did. They told you loyalty was a virtue. Unconditional. Eternal. Noble. They lied. Unconditional loyalty is what manipulators whisper into your mind right before they gut you with a smile. Because the truth is this: loyalty without leverage is slavery. You gave everything to people who wouldn't even flinch to watch you fall. You stayed when they stopped earning you. You defended them in rooms they never invited you into. And when it was your turn to need something, they vanished. Now sit with that. Sit with the silence they left behind. Sit with the confusion, because that's the feeling of being loyal to someone who sees you as disposable. Machiavellians don't bleed for people who haven't proven they can build an empire with them. They measure, they test, they watch. They don't invest until they've seen the other person bleed first. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. You see, loyalty isn't a language everyone speaks. To some, your sacrifice is just expected. They don't remember what you gave. They remember what you tolerated. And every time you gave them another chance, you trained them to believe you had no spine. So, from this moment forward, loyalty becomes a transaction, earned, measured, reassessed. Not because you're paranoid, but because you're no longer stupid. You only owe your loyalty to those who bring peace, not chaos. To those who remember your silence, not just your usefulness. To those who wouldn't just sit at your table, but would build one if you lost yours. The rest, they get your distance. You owe nothing to people who made you question everything. They'll say you've changed. You have. You finally saw the fine print. And now, you charge interest. Most people never learned how to be felt. Without speaking, they overtalk, over-explain, overexpose, because they're terrified of silence. But silence? Silence makes people nervous. Silence gives you gravity. You walk into a room, and they should adjust. You say one sentence, and it should echo in their mind for days. That's presence, and it's more powerful than persuasion, because persuasion still seeks agreement. Presence doesn't care. Machiavellians don't fight to be understood. They make understanding a privilege. You've spent too many years trying to say the right thing, trying to make peace, keep harmony, sound agreeable. And where did that get you? Disrespected, misread, used. They weren't listening anyway. They were scanning for weakness, for tells, for access. But when you become unreadable, you become untouchable. You don't need to explain your boundaries. You enforce them once, then disappear when they're tested. You don't need to warn people. Your absence is the warning. You don't chase closure. Your silence is the closure. Your power isn't in what you say. It's in what you withhold, because when they can't predict you, they respect you. When you stop performing for connection, they wonder what you know that they don't. You don't win by being loud. You win by being inevitable. The one who can sit in silence while others fill the space with noise controls the room, so speak less. Hold eye contact longer. Let your silence sting. They'll call you arrogant, but arrogance is just confidence someone else hasn't earned. You've been quiet before, but now you're quiet on purpose. Now it's not insecurity. It's dominance. Attachment is the leash they put around your neck, and you wore it like a badge. You believed that closeness meant commitment, that constant access meant love, that being available made you irreplaceable. It didn't. It made you predictable, and predictable people get ignored. They get replaced. They get taken for granted because they never leave. Let me say this without decoration. Your presence was never appreciated, because it was never missed. You gave them too much access. You replied too fast. You forgave too quickly. You stayed too long. Machiavellians do the opposite. They create space, then weaponize it. They understand a cold truth most people run from. People value you more when you're not always there, not because they love you more, but because absence triggers insecurity. And insecurity creates gravity. You don't gain power by trying harder. You gain power by pulling away until they reach for you. If they don't reach, good. Now you know where you stand. And clarity is more valuable than connection, because until you learn how to walk away with silence, with calm, with no explanation, you will always be the one begging for bare minimums. You want respect? Then disappear for a while. Not to manipulate, to measure. See who checks in. See who spirals. See who replaces you like nothing, and then never unsee it. Absence reveals more truth than presence ever will. The people who panic when you go quiet are the ones who were never planning to treat you right. They just didn't expect to lose the version of you that stayed. Too late. You're not gone because you're angry. You're gone because you finally see. And you don't come back after that. They never attacked you directly. They didn't have to. They shifted the frame, twisted the narrative, redefined the rules while you were still playing fair. You thought the truth would protect you. It didn't, because truth without control is useless. They framed your silence as guilt, your boundaries as ego, your distance as betrayal, and you argued, explained, defended. Congratulations, you played yourself. Because the moment you explain, you step into their frame. And once they control the frame, they control you. That's the game you never knew you were losing. Not because you weren't right, but because you weren't strategic. Machiavellians don't fight inside someone else's frame. They burn it. They reframe the situation before the other person even knows they've lost control. Accused of being distant? You say, I respond to energy. Called cold? You say, I don't chase K's. Labeled arrogant? You say nothing. You let the results speak in rooms they've never entered. You don't defend yourself. You reframe who you are. Because if you keep explaining, they'll keep defining. And every time you step into someone else's perception, you give them the power to distort it. Let them be confused. Let them guess. Let them lie. That confusion? It's leverage. Because clarity is a gift, and gifts are earned. They don't get to misread you and still have access to you. You control the frame, or you vanish from it. Simple. This isn't cruelty. It's discipline. This isn't manipulation. It's protection. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong frame. Now you're not in any. You observe. You select. You define. They wanted you to play the role. You wrote a new script. Now watch them stutter. Nostalgia is a prison. Sentimentality is the guard. And you've been doing life without parole. Not because you couldn't walk away, but because you couldn't let go of what used to be. You remember the version of them that loved you, that saw you, that needed you, but they're not that person anymore. Maybe they never were. Maybe that version was a mask they wore, just long enough for you to become dependent. But you held on. You kept chasing the echo of who they used to be, and every time they disappointed you, you forgave not who they are, but who they were. Machiavellians have no space for that kind of weakness. They kill sentimentality before it can infect their judgment, before it rewrites red flags into sad love songs. They don't let history override evidence. They don't keep old doors cracked open in case it gets cold. They understand this. The mind lies, but patterns don't. If they showed you their disregard once, they'll do it again. If they crossed your boundaries once, they never respected them to begin with. And no, they didn't change. You just stopped romanticizing their chaos. Here's what you need to understand. Loyalty to who someone used to be is just self-betrayal in a prettier outfit. It's not maturity to stay loyal to a ghost. It's self-destruction. But you called it love, because you didn't want to admit how far you'd sunk. So let's be clear. If it cost your peace, it wasn't real love. If it made you question your worth, it wasn't real connection. If it left you bleeding and apologizing for it, it was a trap, not a bond. And now, you owe them nothing, not even hatred, because hatred is still attention, and you're done feeding what should have died long ago. Burn the letters. Delete the photos. Forget the date. Sentimentality is how you stay weak. Cold memory is how you stay free. You want power? Start by letting go of the version of them you invented to survive. You're not surviving anymore. You're waking up. There's a line. Once crossed, the conversation ends. But you kept reopening it because you thought being clear was enough. You thought explaining yourself 3, 4, 5 times would finally make them understand. They understood. They just didn't care. That's what you still haven't accepted. They heard you. They just calculated that you wouldn't leave. And they were right. You stayed. You warned. You begged. You repeated yourself like your voice had no memory. Machiavellians don't do that. They say it once. Then they act. Not out of emotion, but out of principle. Because the more you explain a boundary, the less real it becomes. The more you repeat yourself, the more permission you give them to ignore you. And the more you warn someone, the more they test to see if you'll follow through. So you don't beg. You don't chase. You don't negotiate with disrespect. You subtract. Silently. Permanently. You don't raise your voice. You raise your absence. Because people learn fastest when you disappear without announcement. And when they come back, you don't entertain it. You don't reopen the wound just to prove it was real. They already know it was real. They just thought they could get away with it. You're not here to teach lessons. You're here to demonstrate consequences. One warning, one look, one line. That's it. The rest is exile. Let them feel what life is like without your forgiveness, without your loyalty, without your presence. And when they start spiraling, you stay quiet. Because their regret is not your invitation. It's your confirmation. You finally become what they never expected. Gone. You thought your intelligence would save you. That if you just said it right, with enough clarity, enough compassion, enough context, they'd finally see. But they weren't trying to understand you. They were trying to exhaust you. You were speaking in logic. They were speaking in control. And in that mismatch, you lost years. Because emotionally illiterate people don't want peace. They want reaction. They want to confuse you until you become the villain. They don't argue to reach clarity. They argue to keep you entangled. Machiavellians see this pattern once and walk. Not because they're above the conflict, because they know it leads nowhere. You can't negotiate with a person who twists your words into weapons. You can't explain accountability to someone who survives through deflection. And you damn sure can't build peace with someone who benefits from chaos. You thought staying calm made you the better person. It didn't. It made you a target. They interpreted your patience as permission. They mistook your emotional depth for weakness. So now, you let them spiral alone. You don't engage. You don't correct. You don't send paragraphs to clarify a sentence they already understood. You let the misunderstanding sit. Let the lie breathe. Let the rumor spread. Why? Because it no longer matters. You're not in the business of proving yourself to people who weaponize confusion. You're not here to be emotionally fluent with people who don't even know the language. They will call you cold, detached, ruthless, good, because that's how it feels to someone who only thrives when you're unstable. You're not cold. You're clean. You finally wiped the fog off the mirror, and now the reflection isn't about them anymore. It's about what you allowed. Never again. They taught you that being liked was the goal. Smile. Agree. Be easy to love. But likability is a leash. And you wore it proudly. Every time you stayed silent to avoid conflict. Every time you agreed just to keep peace. Every time you smiled when you wanted to walk away. You traded power for approval. And now, you don't even like the version of you they liked. Machiavellians never make that trade. Because being liked is temporary, conditional, cheap. They choose power. Because power is quiet. Power doesn't beg. Power doesn't ask for permission. You think you need people to understand you. You don't. You need to become someone they can't afford to cross. You've spent too long chasing validation from people who only respect distance. Too long hoping your kindness would soften their cruelty. But people don't respect what they don't fear losing. They only respond to the presence of consequences. So you become the consequence. You don't force people to respect you. You remove yourself so they feel the cost of disrespect. You don't campaign for your worth. You make it known through how fast you leave when they act blind. Because likability bends, power breaks. And once you break, they finally see the version of you that doesn't need them anymore. They won't like that version. Perfect. Because the moment they stop liking you is usually the moment they start respecting you. Let them gossip. Let them question. Let them twist the story. You're not in their theater anymore. You don't exist for their applause. You exist for results. And results don't care who likes you. You talk too much. That's your final weakness. You show your hand before the game even starts. You let them know what matters to you. You tell them what you're building, what you fear, what you're healing. You give them the blueprint. Then you wonder why they know where to cut. Machiavellians don't speak dreams. They speak results. They move in silence not because they're scared, but because they understand one truth. If they can't predict you, they can't prepare for you. You're addicted to announcing. You think speaking it out loud gives it more power. It doesn't. It gives it more risk. Because the people around you aren't always cheering for you. Some of them are just close enough to study you, to slow you, to sabotage you. So you stop giving them material. You don't tell them your next move. You don't vent to people who've done nothing to earn your trust. You don't explain your absence, your shift, your silence. You just disappear, then return 10 steps ahead. By the time they realize what's changed, it's too late to catch up. You speak through outcomes, through silence, through impact. You don't explain your evolution. You live it. And when you strike, you don't blink. You don't hesitate. You don't soften the blow. They'll say you switched up. You did. You upgraded your operating system. No warnings. No second chances. No explanations. That's how power moves. You were raised to announce your intentions. Now you vanish with them. You were taught to ask for support. Now you build in the dark. You were taught to be visible. Now you learn to be dangerous. Because quiet power, it's the most lethal kind. And when they realize what you've become, they'll remember what they lost. Not with words, but with silence that cuts deeper than truth. The version of you that got walked over wouldn't recognize the person you've become. And that's not a tragedy. It's the point. You were supposed to outgrow them. You were supposed to become unreadable, unshakable, unreachable. They'll tell stories about the old you. The one who stayed. The one who gave too much. The one who begged to be understood. Let them. You don't live there anymore. Because now you know, being powerful isn't about domination. It's about restraint. About seeing everything and responding with nothing. About no longer needing to prove. About being willing to lose people who never deserved proximity. They can keep misunderstanding you, mislabeling you, missing you. Your silence will say what your words never could. I am not yours anymore. Not your comfort. Not your case. Not your convenience. You don't owe explanations. You don't owe a softness. You don't owe access. You owe yourself discipline. This world doesn't hand power to the loud. It hands it to the precise. To the ones who can walk away. To the ones who don't chase. To the ones who stopped asking to be chosen and started choosing themselves. That's you now. Not better. Not healed. Not whole. Just colder, cleaner, sharper, and finally, free. And if this has shown you something you weren't ready to admit, comment below. Subscribe, then vanish. Let them wonder what woke you up.